continue some discussion around generative AI. Love the tee up from Seb. I got a tee up earlier on cloud. I got a tee up on LLMs right now. And so we've got a great panel here. I think they're gonna talk about some topics here, but we're gonna start with introductions. And so why don't we start at the far end, Salman, and then we'll move right down. Name, title, firm, couple sentences. Let's go.
Good. So I'm Salman Ahmed. I'm the Executive Director of Partnerships at Dow Jones. We're a content, data, and research organization. We're also the publishers of the Wall Street Journal, Barron's, MarketWatch, and Investors Business Daily. The partnerships team kind of facilitates and leads bidirectional, mutually beneficial discussions to empower platforms and to enable users, basically, with our content, data, and technology.
Awesome. Thank you.
Super. Hi, everyone. My name is Ankit. I'm part of the AWS Specialist Organization, and I lead the ML practice for AWS Canada. My job is all about putting machine learning in the hands of businesses and enterprises and helping them do cool, innovative stuff. And I'm really passionate about democratizing the machine learning. And the picture that you see is from my previous life before my life got hijacked by generative AI.
I'm Dehghanpisheh. I go by D to simplify my life. I'm one of the co-founders of ProtectAI. We're either branding geniuses or branding idiots. We protect AI systems and provide security for machine learning platforms.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yara. I lead the AI risk practice at EY Canada. And we focus on innovation in the risk space using AI and also on responsible AI. And part of our purpose is scientific and social responsibility as we adopt Gen AI.
All right, we're going to kick it off with a little foundational information around, what are we talking about when we talk about AI, generative AI, ML? D, start us off. Give us a nice foundation to have some conversation.
Sure. So I think before we define the definition, I think it's important to understand why we would be even talking about this. When you think about the following technology revolutions, social media, mobile, cloud, and now AI, the first three had something interesting in common. Facebook debuted in 2004. The iPhone debuted in 2007. The iPad in 2009. AWS in 2006. And now we're talking about journey to the cloud. Now we're talking about mobile. Now we're not going to wait 20 years to talk about AI. And in fact, AI is already in your firms. If you have anything to do with mortgages, AI has been in your firm for at least 3 years in the form of intelligent document processing, right? But the difference between AI and generative AI is that AI is actually just taking a deterministic action, right? It's doing a specific thing. It's not creating. Generative AI is generating. It is creating something. So the interface is very different. And that interface change, meaning that's not something I see, to, oh my God, it's something that's doing all kinds of stuff. I love the term hallucinations, by the way. I'm going to use that with my wife and call it a mistake. I'm hallucinating. But the point of that is that generative AI is creating something, right? And regular AI is just doing something, and it's very prescriptive.
Hey, Kit. Do you want to build on that? What are some practical use cases that you're seeing out there?
No, absolutely, yeah. So what Dee mentioned is pretty spot on, right? So if you look at your task-specific models like NNN, CNNs, RNNs, these different neural networks, the foundation models or generative AI models are pretty capable. They are quite powerful because the underlying architecture, right, which is a transformer-based architecture, is highly scalable. So you can throw a lot of compute and a lot of data, like think about every data which is on the internet. And because of all of these things, these models are quite capable. In terms of use cases, we see multiple. I can categorize them into three major verticals. Think about your customer experiences, both internal and external. Whether it is chatbots, whether it is about building next generation contact centers, agent assist, those kind of use cases. Second vertical would be around improving your employee productivity. think about knowledge search, or conversational knowledge search, as we now call it. And we can think about building pitch books, or even portfolio analysis. In merger and acquisitions, we can do a lot of due diligence, where we have tons of data, a lot of document that we have to analyze and process before we take a decision on that. These foundation models can take a lot of heavy lifting out of the equations, and then you have your resources, your employees focusing on doing the actual task, right, which is taking the final decision and making that position out of that. And then finally, we also see a lot of improvement around improving the business processes or the way we do things. For example, as Dee mentioned about intelligent document processing, right? Before your mortgage application or credit card application reaches the person's desk who has to take a decision to approve or disapprove or reject it, these foundation models can provide a summary. They can make sure that all the necessary documents have been provided by the applicant, the data is matching, so cross-validation is done, it's already extracted, it's in a format which is acceptable in your backend application. So all of those heavy liftings is pre-done by these foundation models, Gen AI services, and your teams can focus on the decision making, the final task, or the last mile task that you have to do.
If I could just quickly add, just on top of what Ankit mentioned, just around the customer service experience, the introduction of video and chatbots. I think the opportunity really needs to be looked at from the perspective of getting to a community of your own users. I mean, particularly important across financial services, banking, insurance, wherever there's a high volume of like customer interaction, maybe low-level customer interaction even. You can get people to interact with you that currently just don't even think about interacting because they feel like they aren't going to get any help, breaking down barriers around language and real-time translation, text in, text out, text in, video out for people that maybe aren't able to read properly, and all kinds of other things that kind of open up the barriers for people to be able to interact with you and the services and the tools and the capabilities that you offer. I think that really could be very interesting.
So Yara, it sounds like we should just dive headlong into generative AI. We should enable everyone to use this stuff and just never look back. That's the right thing to do, right? Like, we're going to get so much out of it.
Cautiously.
Right?
So to enable the benefits that Ankit mentioned around efficiency, effectiveness, and enhancing customer experience, we need to make sure we're aware of the risks and we mitigate them appropriately. You've all seen the bans of ChatGPT across financial services. You've seen some of the copyright lawsuits and so on. So it's really important to look at the risks and put the right controls in place to mitigate them. One of the key risks is trust and accuracy. Dee mentioned hallucinations. So how do we direct our model in a way that it doesn't extrapolate beyond the boundary? In other words, we adjust our prompt engineering so that the model really operates within its boundary. How do we make sure that we address fairness and bias? These models are trained on vast amount of data that contain the historical bias we replicated year after year. So how do we make sure that an image of a CEO is not necessarily a white man? How do you make sure that there are no associations between religion and race and negative words and so on? So what are the tools to identify and remediate bias for large language models? And you'll see that a lot of the vendor models have content mediation wrapped up around the large language models. And this is very helpful along with the additional testing that financial institutions can do on those models. Two additional risks I want to highlight are around privacy and surveillance. How do you make sure that we don't share proprietary data from an institution through those APIs? Similarly, for personally identifiable information, financial institutions have a lot of personal data and sensitive data. And you have GDPR regulations in Europe, we have IDA and Bill C-27 coming up in Canada, E-23. So how do we make sure we remain compliant from a data perspective? Yeah. Last, I'd like to talk about copyright infringement, compliance. In Canada, we have a Gen AI code of conduct that was released. At the moment, it's a recommendation. It's not a guideline. It's not a regulatory guideline. But soon we'll have updates through IDA on Gen AI that institutions will have to observe. A lot of these considerations around transparency, around ongoing monitoring, and so on. And this is to avoid some of the incidents. For example, we had a photograph company sue an AI art generator. We've had Samsung ban ChatGPT completely, and so on. So really important to address these regulatory, reputational, and business risks.
Yeah, just to echo on that, I think it's interesting, right? 2004, people wanted to ban Facebook. That didn't work out so well. So they can ban ChatGPT, but the problem is employees are still going to use it, right? So to address those safety and security risks, and they're different constructs, right? There's safety risks, there's security risks, and there's regulatory constraints, right? And in our industry, in finance in particular, we have to think about all three of those dimensions at once. But the question is, what you're doing today, most of the people in here are touching development in some form or fashion, right? Like, raise your hand if you're involved in development or somewhere in this space. Okay. So you have a whole lot of infrastructure, a whole lot of tools. Your banks and firms and employers have a whole lot of processes to make sure your code is secure. That's not happening in AI/ML, right? And for you to invoke safety, you have to have security. You have to know that something is trusted. You have to know that something is, compliant. You have to know that it's being guardrailed in an appropriate way, so that you can also meet the regulatory needs. And that is going to come about very, very quickly.
I think the cautionary tales around not using this just within the work environment are already starting to come out. There's, obviously the infamous case now, news, social media, of the lawyer who, used ChatGPT or some bar type tool to be able to, create legal briefs and submitted that and got sanctioned by the courts. But there are kind of the real implications of hallucinations, right? Generally, I think we're having to say this over again, it's like, don't use Wikipedia to do your homework, don't use ChatGPT to submit, work as your own. Just don't do it. It's assistive, use it to do some things, trust but verify. But at the same time, I think to touch on the things that Yara spoke about, kind of, trust and accuracy is really important, right? Because I think there's real life cases now where somebody is asked a question. A journalist was doing research on a story, and out came information around a case, naming a person who was named in and around fraud and some other embezzlement type activities. The journalist picked up the phone to get a little bit more kind of information around that. The person says, I was really never involved in that. I was never named in that case. Where did you get this information? ChatGPT told me. He's now suing ChatGPT for libel, right? Then there's also kind of the implications around liability, right? Who's responsible for the outputs of these things, right? I think the American friends in the audience would know kind of like Section 230, the Telecommunications Act, maybe not, but it's what grants immunity to the platforms like Twitter, Facebook, et cetera, for what their users put on there, right? But I put in an input, and you are presenting me with the output. It's not my output, right? So who's liable for the misinformation in that? And so I think that's really important to consider as we go down this path and in adopting this technology as well.
Yeah, and the regulators this is the one thing where regulators are ahead of the industry, right? To echo on 230, you see the EU AI Act, you see Canada's framework, which is really impressive. And you're starting to see U.S. legislation. It's pretty rare when in the U.S. Republicans and Democrats both agree on something and it accelerates very quickly. That tells you that either it's a really bad idea, which is not the case, or it's going to happen, which is the case. And the best example we have is in healthcare and life sciences, right? The example we use is workflows that are using generative AI to help scientists both find targets for new drugs, develop the target for the molecule itself, and develop the protocol to accelerate that time to market. Now, that has nothing to do with finance, but why is that important? Because it's an enhancement tool. It's used to make these scientists better at their jobs to get the drug out faster. But that same tool can be used to produce chemical weapons. That's a problem. The same foundational models, the same types of things. So Senators Markey out of Massachusetts, a Democrat, and Bud, who is a Republican out of North Carolina, hard to believe that these two agree on anything, they are sponsoring legislation and running it through the Senate to limit how AI/ML can be used inside of healthcare and life sciences. And that requires things like lineage, things like safety regulations, things like model cards. All of those things are coming. But here's the difference between AI, generative or not, and every other technology transition we've said. No one is saying, no, we won't do this. How many people said we won't move to the cloud? How many people said we won't adopt mobile? We won't let iPhones do corporate email? It took a long time, but everybody said no. No one is saying no right now with AI. And so it's going to happen a lot faster, and it's good that regulations are coming about.
So basically, Ginny is out of the bottle, right? I mean, we got to.
She's dancing on the floor, man.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't shut it down, right? We can't put this thing back into the bottle. We got to figure out a way to use it, embrace it in a more secure way, to have, with the enough guardrails in place. We got to embrace it. I think it's a great moment in the tech world. It's gonna have a big transformation impact across.
I feel like this could go on forever, this conversation. We could talk about this endlessly, but I am cognizant of the food and drinks in the other room. And so what I'm going to do is give everyone an opportunity for a parting thought. Something like, where's your long-term target? Or, what are some concrete things that you guys are doing? We're going to start at the far end and come back this way to give Yara the last word. Have a go, Sal.
Yeah, I think for us, the main thing that we're really excited about, and I think others might be, is just around contextualization at scale, right? And that includes everything from content to user experience, right? Based on the personas and the segmentation data and all of that sort of stuff that we've been collecting over the years across the financial services industry, but now. For us, at least in an organization that is content driven, right? Create once and use it multiple times. That's a real opportunity for us. But we're coming up to kind of the latter half of the second century of being a trusted provider of content, news, and data. So we're not just going to blindly jump into kind of creating variants of our content and so on and so forth. So we'll have a measured approach, but the place that we see real opportunity is contextualization at scale for different personas.
So at AWS, what we believe, our perspective on this generative AI is that you'll not have one model or one model provider, kind of leading the market. We will have a lot of different players. As you can see, the number of model providers have grown at an incremental rate, right? There are already so many different companies coming up. Not only we will have generic models, we will also have industry-specific, task-specific models as well. For example, we've got Harvey.ai, which is doing great work in the legal sector. We've got, Bloomberg came up with their own GPT model for the FSI industry. We've got something in the semiconductor industry as well. So we'll have these industry-specific models also come up to be more dedicated or accurate for that specific industry. And the second thing that we are focusing on is don't take your data to the model. Rather, try and figure out a way to bring the model to your data. How can we bring those models and deploy those models within our own accounts and not have your data leave your premises and leave your accounts? Your data is going to be the most important asset going forward. We believe customers will look at, enterprises will look at building models as a cost, because you'll have pre-built models from different sources available, but your data or all the efforts that you're going to do to build a high quality, high fidelity data set is going to be your long-term investment. So, and then you'll use that data to either fine tune or domain adapt those kind of models. So those are some of the things that we at AWS are kind of focusing on.
From my point of view, I'm going to tie it to the capital markets industry. SR 11.7, which was the regulation in 2011, I think, that was made by the Federal Reserve Board in the US, required model regulation. And what they were talking about was financial model regulation. And that is a set of policies that said, hey, when you are telling me what your value at risk is and what your books are looking like, I need to know who, how much, when it was updated, how it was updated, and it needs to be met in this format. What's happening now is that chief model risk officers and model risk offices inside of the U.S. capital markets participants are actually meeting that regulation with AI/ML, and they're using tools to kind of understand who was the data scientist that built the model, who last touched it, what was the data set used, how did the model make its prediction, and aggregating that. There is going to be AI used in non-generative AI ways, and it's already here upon us to meet your compliance requirements. It's coming. So it's already here in most cases. So you just need to make sure that you understand who's touching the AI and ML, what they did, when they did it, and how you can aggregate that quickly so that we're not trapped by bureaucracy and slowed down.
I'll piggyback off that. So who, what, how. This is AI governance. And this is what we're supporting our partners in the industry set up so that they can responsibly adopt AI and generative AI. In parallel, making a choice of technology that makes sense across the institution. And that's one of the main differentiators compared to more traditional AI. You could develop it in your own local Python notebook. That's no longer possible. You have to make a choice that is that takes into consideration cost, performance, your current infrastructure across the industry, across the institution. And we've talked about some of the promise of these models, some of the applications, whether in call center analytics, whether in reporting automation, whether in tailoring the experience to the customer so that they have a more seamless end-to-end interaction with an agent or with a product. So with a lot of promise, I think we need to make sure we bring the community together, because it really does take a village to build generative AI. It takes compliance and legal and analytics and technology and everyone coming together.
And lots of data.
Lots of data.
And lots of data.
Copyright compliant data.
When you bring those all together, we call it, are people familiar with the term purple teaming in here? Red team or blue team? So in security, red teaming is offense, blue teaming is defense. Purple teaming is where they are brought together and they're taught how to make things safer. What she just mentioned is beautifully articulated, and we call that violet teaming, because it's not just about bringing technology on the red side, offense, or blue side, defense, to create purple. It's about bringing HR, legal, compliance. The panel that was earlier talking about, biases and unconscious bias, you have to have that representation when you are deploying generative AI. So we call that violet teaming. We think that that's a process that addresses what Yara was talking about.
So we ran a tiny bit long.
Sorry.
I have
Chuckle bias drinks.
I have not done my job as effectively as I could have. But I think people will forgive us because the discussion was so high quality. So thank you guys for this wonderful panel. I encourage everyone who's here to corner people and talk about the things that they brought up. So let's give a hand to our panel. And I'll ask you guys to sit there while I just give a quick thank you. First, to all of you who have attended tonight. We know taking time out of your busy schedules is not easy. We hope we've provided you with some great content tonight. We know we're going to provide you with some other great content in the form of food and beverage and networking out there in a second. Second, I want to thank all of our panelists. This panel, the panel before, the panel before, the panel before, all the panels. I want to thank all of them for coming up here and giving you guys great content. And lastly, our sponsors, BMO Capital Markets, RBC Capital Markets, AWS, EY, Deloitte, Dow Jones, Expro, and Rose Rocket. Without the support of our partners, we can't put on events like this and bring this great content and incredible networking opportunities. And so a big round of applause for everyone. Including specifically the OpenFin team, Mitra and Jacqueline, for once again putting on an event that everyone wants to come to and wants to talk about going forward. So there's a bunch of stuff that we'll put out on socials, all the talks, as we said earlier, we're going to be pushing them out there. We'd love you guys to like, share, all that stuff that we have to do. to make sure that people are thinking about the topics that we're thinking about, and moving that conversation forward. Anyway, big thanks to the whole crew. Let's go eat and drink.